So I've got time for about 6 or 7 minutes of questions. Please state your name and affiliation before asking me a question, so I've got an idea of who you are, and thanks for the invitation. And who wants to be first?
Well, Congressman, I'll start if I could while people are gathering their thoughts. My question is there, what can Congress do to try to address this question of executive reluctance to enforce the law or what have you? For instance, Congressman Smith has introduced the HALT Act to lift discretion from the administration, at least till the end of this term. Is that advisable, or are there other things that Congress can do?
Well, I think the HALT Act, if it ever gets through the Senate, which I think has a 0 chance, would be vetoed, and obviously we wouldn't have the votes to override the veto, but the mere fact of its introduction points out that the administration is not enforcing the law that's on the books. In terms of dealing with illegal immigration, I've said all along we need to do 2 things. One is to secure the border, and the second is to enforce the laws that are already on the books that make it an offense to hire an illegal immigrant. If we do that, then we turn off the magnet of illegal immigration that draws people into this country and running the risk of being arrested or killed going in the border, and then living underground and probably being paid in cash so that they're completely off the books. I do favor mandatory E-Verify, and that's being worked on. Now the markup will start later on today, but not get very far because of our schedule, but will be brought up again next week. And the way to do E-Verify is, number 1, is to require it for new hires, and then later on hire it for, or require it for existing employees, because an illegal immigrant who is an existing employee ends up becoming an indentured servant to that employer who is violating the law, because they'll get caught if they change jobs.
Any questions? Somebody else have a question. Oh, yes.
Sure. Thank you very much, Representative Sensenbrenner. I'm Claire Bergeron from the Migration Policy Institute. I was curious on your point on visa overstays, and I was wondering if you could expand a little on whether, sort of policy-wise, you would see a better tracking system being an expansion of U.S. visit, and whether, obviously the problem with visit is always the lack of an ability to track people as they exit, and whether you would sort of see that as being an airline motivated program or a government motivated program.
Well, it should be both. We are the only major country in the world that does not check travelers upon exit from the country, particularly non-U.S. national. If you go to Europe anywhere, even with the Schengen agreement, when you leave the Schengen area, your passport is checked and stamped. That does not happen in the United States. I had hoped that the institution of U.S. visit would provide an electronic checking mechanism of people who leave the country. And I remember for a while there were kiosks at the international departure gates in the major airports that I go tramping through between here and Wisconsin on a weekly basis with DHS personnel around. And that ended up falling apart and was withdrawn during the Bush administration. Picking up I-94 forms by the airlines is great, but it's not computerized. This is kind of the shoebox method of keeping track of people who are on non-immigrant visas, all of which have an expiration date of some time or another. We have to have an exit system, number 1, to track visa overstays. But if Congress should pass some type of temporary worker program, the only way we make sure that it is a temporary worker program is checking people when they go home when their work permission expires.
Congressman, we had numbers you say mobilized our members to support your work with the state licenses on Real ID. It's since the passage of that, there's been especially a lot of opposition from the right wing in this country, claiming that the driver's license provisions take away civil rights of citizens and
That's a bunch of bunk.
and threaten their privacy. What's your
Real ID is not a national ID. It does not establish a national database. What it requires is that an applicant for a driver's license have that application checked against the databases of other states to make sure that that applicant does not have a valid driver's license issued by another state. And we have used this program for about 20 years to make sure that people who get commercial driver's licenses, meaning truck driver's licenses, don't run around with a pocket full of valid driver's licenses, and when they get close to losing their license on points in one state, the next time they're pulled over, they whip out a license from another state. The 9/11 Commission found that at least 15 of the 19 hijackers had multiple driver's licenses issued by at least 5 states. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Mohammed Atta blew off a traffic ticket on his Florida license and had a bench warrant issued against him in Florida, and right before 9/11 he was pulled over in Maryland, and he had a valid Maryland driver's license, so the computer in the squad car would not be able to pick up the fact that he had a bench warrant out against him, and that's a requirement that he be taken into custody and returned to the court issuing that warrant. And that is what anybody in this room would have happen to them if they blew off a traffic ticket and only had one driver's license. So it's a traffic safety issue as well as an anti-terrorism issue, because if you live in Virginia and you're 1 point away from losing your license because you're a bad driver and have a lot of tickets, without this type of check, you could come either into the district or go to Maryland and get a spanking clean license with no points against it, and keep on driving and accumulating points against that license. So I think that this argument that Real ID is a national ID card is a canard. I guess what makes me upset is that the people who have attacked Real ID were very silent when the stimulus bill of 2 years ago established a national database for our medical records and appropriated, I believe, $1.25 billion for that. And that is a national ID base that was created there. Real ID did not create a national ID base. It just required one state to check against already existing databases of driver's license in other states so that you wouldn't have more than one. And you know, the 2 principal points of Real ID is 1 driver's license per person, period, and no driver's licenses for illegal immigrants.
Anyone else? This is about to be the last question.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for being here. We always love to hear your comments on these issues. I'm Penny Eastman with L1 Identity Solutions. We do a lot of the driver's licenses around the country, so we do a lot of work on Real ID. One of the impressions that I'm getting, and I'm hoping you're going to tell me that I'm wrong, is that our country is getting less and less concerned about security issues, and as we get farther away from 9/11, even though it was just the anniversary, the sense I get when I talk to people, you know, there's some provisions in the new TSA reauthorization language that would weaken the hazmat regulations for truck drivers. I mean, there's just some things going on that lead me to believe that maybe we're not as focused on security anymore.
Unfortunately, you are not wrong.
I was afraid you were going to tell me that.
Yeah. And that even right after 9/11, you know, I heard a lot from folks back home as well. We live in the middle of the country, and Wisconsin's kind of an out-of-the-way place, and this is never going to happen here. And I had a meeting with one suburban mayor saying, well, why should we do all of this stuff with EMTs? We're just, kind of a sleepy bedroom community and stuff like that. And I said, well, if the U.S. Bank Tower, 39 floors, gets hit, you're going to have to go into Milwaukee on mutual aid. And this woman's face kind of turned white as a sheet. And I said, wouldn't it be nice to make sure that your first responders were trained to deal with something like that, even though the tallest building in your community is 5 stories high? And they have been trained that way. But, it required a statement like that, which was seated in her office and not in a public meeting, have the training that was done so that those emergency first responders would be able to deal with a major disaster. And I think the same thing could be said about other places that thought that they would be safe, like Richmond. And I think we know that one of the buildings there was targeted, and we were able to find out about that and stop it before it happened. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Thanks for coming.